An overview of Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. I'm D. Elizabeth Glasgow, and I'm your lecturer for this series. So first, let's talk a little bit about who Michel Foucault was. Michel Foucault, the author of Discipline and Punish, was a radical French social philosopher. He was also an historian and a literary critic. Now, today, he is recognized widely as being one of the most influential contemporary thinkers in both the social sciences and the humanities. He was the son of a surgeon, and he grew up as a part of a wealthy and socially conservative household in Western France. He also enjoyed a privileged education. Now, later, Foucault would try to downplay this privilege. He went against his father's wishes when he went to university by studying philosophy and the history of science. He wrote his PhD thesis on the history of madness, and in that thesis, he drew a distinction between mental illness and madness. The latter, he argued, is a social construct that is based on subjective assumptions. The thesis was published in English under the title Madness and Civilization, and later just The History of Madness. It was extremely well received. It won a prestigious award in France, awarded by the French National Center for Scientific Research, which is the main governmental research organization in France. Foucault's next books were The Birth of the Clinic in 1963. He also wrote The Order of Things in 1966 and The Archaeology of Knowledge in 1969. Throughout his life, Foucault was committed to left wing politics. For example, he was a leading anti prison activist, and that is the subject of the book Discipline and Punish. A lot of left wing activism in the 1960s and 1970s in France was dominated by Marxist ideas. That is, those beliefs that are derived from the work of the German political theorist Karl Marx. And it really talked about the need to end structures of power that exploited wage earners and others. Foucault's intellectual contributions, however, were based on his claim that no one person or group alone possesses power, because the individual, according to Foucault, is constructed from the power relations in which he or she lives. And escape from these power relations, to Foucault's understanding, was impossible. In the book Discipline and Punish, Foucault departs from this idea of power as something that is exerted by the government, by a king, or by those who have wealth and power because of it. Power, Foucault understood, is discipline. It is important to note the particular way in which Foucault used the word. For him, discipline was not the top down application of direct coercion. That's the way most of us conceive of it contemporarily as well. But discipline, according to Foucault, was power used in a way that makes the individual self regulate. So when we look at the penal system as an example, Foucault demonstrated how the discipline of the prison is a specific form of power that has become embedded in society since its emergence in the 17th century. It is, in other words, historically contingent, meaning that it grew out of a particular historical context. Discipline and Punish is a history of the modern penal system. Foucault wanted to analyze punishment in its social context and to examine how changing power relations affected that punishment. He began by analyzing the situation before the 18th century when you had public executions and corporal punishment being meted out as key punishments, and torture was part of most criminal investigations. Punishment was ceremonial and directed at the prisoner's body. It was a kind of ritual where the audience was important. Public execution reestablished the authority and the power of the king. In popular literature that's reported, the details of the executions are quite prominent, and the public was heavily involved in those activities. The 18th century saw various calls for reform of punishment. The reformers, according to Foucault, were not motivated by a concern for the prisoner's welfare. Rather, according to Foucault, they wanted to make power operate more efficiently. The reformers proposed a theater of punishment, where you had a complex system of representations and signs that were displayed publicly. Punishments related obviously to their crimes and served as an obstacle to lawbreaking. That was the intent. So at this time, prison is not yet imaginable as a kind of penalty. There were three new models of penalty that help to overcome resistance to it. There are, however, great differences that existed between the kind of coercive institution and the early punitive kind. The way is prepared for the prison by the development in the 17th and 18th centuries of the disciplines. Discipline is a series of techniques where you have the body's operations being controlled. Discipline worked by coercion and arranging the individual's movements and his experience of space and time. This is achieved by using devices like timetables and military drills and the process of exercise. Through discipline, individuals are created out of a mass. Disciplinary power has three elements: hierarchical observation, normalizing judgment, and examination. Observation and the gaze are key instruments of power. By these processes and through the human sciences, the notion of this norm developed. And when I say this norm, I mean the norm of prison. Disciplinary power is really exemplified by Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon. Now, a Panopticon is a building that shows how people can be supervised and controlled efficiently. Institutions modeled on the Panopticon begin to spread through society. Prison develops from the idea of discipline. It aims to deprive the individual of his freedom and to reform him. The penitentiary is the next development. It combines the prison with the workshop and the hospital. The penitentiary replaces the prisoner with the delinquent. The delinquent is created as a response to changes in popular illegality in order to marginalize and control popular behavior. This is all according to Foucault. Foucault argued that criticism of the failure of prisons misses the point because failure is part of its very nature. The process by which failure and operation are combined is what Foucault argued was the carceral system. The aim of prison and of the carceral system, according to Foucault, is to produce delinquency as a means of structuring and controlling crime. From this perspective, they succeed. The prison is part of a network of power that spreads throughout society and which is controlled by the rules of strategy. Calls for its abolition fail to recognize the depth at which it is embedded in modern society, Foucault argues, or of its real function in society. Beyond the history of such disciplinary procedures, Foucault was really concerned with the techniques and the mechanisms of power that use these approaches. In this work, Discipline and Punish, Foucault began a deep examination of the relationship between the physical body, the individual, and what he calls power knowledge. Power knowledge is the marriage of power and knowledge that allows the powerful to classify and control people and things. These are all themes that appear throughout Foucault's writing. So, what does Discipline and Punish say? Discipline and Punish argues that social institutions exercise power and discipline on the bodies and the souls of their subjects through what Foucault termed le regard, the gaze. Forming this argument, Foucault returns to a discussion of the Panopticon, which again is a model of a prison invented by the British social reformer Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century. Again, the Panopticon was designed so that the inmates couldn't see their guards and therefore never knew if they were being watched or not. It is the perpetual possibility of observation that encourages them to behave. Foucault suggested that the panopticon and the mechanisms of power it contained extended way beyond the prison and into other institutions of society. For instance, a driver who cannot be certain that he or she is not being tracked by a speed camera. This is an example of self regulation, where the driver would choose not to speed just in case he or she is being watched. According to this behavior is conditioned by the awareness of the possibility of control. For Foucault, the individual is essentially a product of this monitoring and control. Surveillance, the systematic monitoring by government institutions, produces, according to Foucault, docile bodies, which Foucault defined as bodies that can be monitored and psychologically controlled, and which are then trained to self govern. Put simply, we are the sum of what we abstain from doing for fear of being judged, of being seen, or especially of being punished, according to Foucault. Why does discipline and punish matter? Discipline and punish is considered one of the modern classics of sociological, historical, and philosophical thought. The groundbreaking analysis that Foucault offered presented a study of social institutions that has produced important insights into how people and masses are governed. It traces the evolution of modern power structures, such as the current prison system, and considers their effects on human freedom and identity. Discipline and Punish is also unique in its approach to its argument that it is not so much a theory of power as a history of its transformation. Foucault's historical approach was designed to allow for the study of different institutions and power structures. The work itself was not intended as a critique of any one specific system, but was rather a way to understand how power itself works. Foucault's analysis encouraged scholars to dramatically reevaluate how they look at the operation of power, of knowledge, and what constitutes the individual. Even though some sociologists may not agree with Foucault's understanding of power, there are very few trained sociologists who are unfamiliar with it. And again, Foucault went to this subject matter, the intersection of power and knowledge, quite often in his work overall. Discipline and Punish has had an impact on other disciplines as well. Foucault's recognition that individuals are shaped by the systems of power and knowledge they inhabit has been widely applied in academic debates about human agency and choice and in discussions about identity. Foucault's understanding of power and concepts like discourse has been widely adapted. For Foucault, discourse was a way of speaking arising from the influence of history and power, but a term often used for the exchange of ideas and the way that this exchange defines how subjects are understood. The notion of power knowledge and of the Panopticon. Again, the theory that the Panopticon prison is a model for all power relations in society have not only become part of the vocabulary of the sociology, but appear in disciplines as diverse as history, economics, anthropology, and political science. Scholars in fields as varied as cultural studies, media studies, literary studies have all applied Foucault's ideas to the analysis of power relations in literature, in music, film, and television, and others. The theory advanced in Discipline and Punish is often used to understand how individuals internalize power and the effect this has on both social relations and the possibility of resistance. Foucault's ideas have gained new relevance in current debates on individual privacy in the digital age. His identification of the practical benefits of surveillance for social institutions, as well as its human toll, anticipated many of the discussions we're having today about the effects of living under the gaze of closed circuit TV or CCTV. Similarly, the disclosures about whistleblower Edward Snowden in 2013, for example, revealed the extent of the surveillance of U.S. citizens conducted by the state, known as the NSA and other intelligence firms. In many ways, those activities confirm aspects of Foucault's thesis. I'm D. Elizabeth Glasgow. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.